Welcome to this episode of The Other Side Australia, and if you're wondering why you're looking at my face instead of the much more handsome Damian Curry, it's because I've fired him and taken control of his entire show. Now this week, seriously, Damian has had to deal with the death of his father. And not only is he now trying to organise a funeral, he's trying to organise a funeral in the midst of a lockdown in Brisbane, Queensland. I'm sure Damian would have a lot to say about that lockdown. But Damian's father, Leisure Joseph Curry, died at 90 years old and spent most of his life caring for special needs children. In fact, he was the founding principal of 3 special needs schools and went on to be the principal of 3 more. By the end of his career, he actually served 3 terms as the president of the Queensland Special School Principals Association. So quite an interesting man who gave his life to the needs of our special needs kids. I also identified strongly with his Lebanese community, and in his eulogy, there's going to be some chat about the amazing food that he had throughout his life, and we all know I'm a big fan of food. This week, instead of having a full episode, what we're going to do is we're going to look back on one of the segments from last week's episode 28, where Damian documented for us what actually happened between the meeting of the USA and China when they met in Alaska. And the conclusion Damian makes in this segment is that we shouldn't be listening to what people say, especially the Chinese government. We should be viewing what they do, their actions. That's how you know their true intentions. Because during this exchange in Alaska, China actually took the USA to task for human rights abuses of all things. Incredible claim to make coming from the People's Republic of China government. Anyway, at the end of the day, Damian points out that we need to decide what to do and how to handle these international situations by watching people's actions and making actions accordingly in response. Because if we start to listen to what these countries say, the rhetoric from any country really, but particularly from China, then we will be left unprepared for what may be coming in the future. I hope you enjoyed this segment, and Damian Curry will be back with us next week.
Speaking of authoritarian one-party government-controlled media states and the utter hypocrisy of the left, this week our friendly neighbourhood communists, the People's Republic of China, had the audacity to have a go at the United States for its social injustices at home, playing on the divisions in Western culture. And while we fight amongst ourselves over woke trivia, China gets stronger. And don't think they're not stirring the pot here in Australia and in America too. Last week we reported on how the top US commander in the Indo-Pacific had warned that China is rapidly stepping up its efforts to supplant American military power in Asia.
Hong Kong, and Xinjiang, and Tibet, and the line of actual control in the South China Sea and the East China Sea. I worry that they're accelerating their ambitions to supplant the United States and our leadership role in the rules-based international order, which they've long said that they want to do that by 2050. I'm worried about them moving that target closer. Taiwan is clearly one of their ambitions before then. And I think the threat is manifest during this decade, in fact, in the next 6 years.
That was Admiral Philip Davidson, the head of the US Indo-Pacific Command, speaking in testimony before the US Senate Armed Services Committee. So he thinks, in summary, China will attack Taiwan in some way before 2027. Now this could spark an all-out war in the Indo-Pacific, and with that war being fought on biological, technical, and traditional grounds, it's likely the US and our other allies will be too busy fighting on the home front to be helping us out. We also shared last week that the new US Secretary of State, the equivalent of our Foreign Affairs Minister, Antony Blinken, and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, were off to visit key allies Japan and South Korea for talks about how to manage China and North Korea, and that when that trip was over, that Blinken would be heading off to Alaska for talks with his Chinese counterparts. If you were worried that the Biden administration might turn out to go easy on China, as I was, it seems initially at least that they are prepared to take a very tough stand. Once again, we're not going to edit this down like the mainstream broadcast media do because it's very important. Here's Blinken's opening remarks to that meeting in Alaska this week with the Chinese Foreign Ministry.
Our administration is committed to leading with diplomacy, to advance the interests of the United States and to strengthen the rules-based international order. We'll also discuss our deep concerns with actions by China, including in Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Taiwan, cyber attacks on the United States, economic coercion toward our allies. Each of these actions threaten the rules-based order that maintains global stability. That's why they're not merely internal matters and why we feel an obligation to raise these issues here today. I've said that the United States relationship with China will be competitive where it should be, collaborative where it can be, adversarial where it must be.
So that's good, strong stuff. And this bit from the United States National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, was good news for Australia.
We do not seek conflict, but we welcome stiff competition, and we will always stand up for our principles, for our people, and for our friends.
Well, Yang Jiechi, China's Foreign Affairs Director, hit back just as hard, saying, on cyber attacks, let me say that whether it's the ability to launch cyber attacks or the technologies that could be deployed, the US is the champion in this regard. So we hope that when talking about universal values or international public opinion on the part of the United States, we hope that the US side will think about whether it feels reassured saying those things, because the US does not represent the world, only the government of the United States. Ouch. Well, I think the values of freedom, liberty, and basic human rights are pretty universal, Yang, me old mate. And if you ask the oppressed Chinese groups, they'd agree. That's if they were allowed to speak out without their relatives being tortured or killed, or even allowed to vote. Blinken chastised the Chinese side for grandstanding and exceeding their allotted time in their opening remarks. And he even told the media to hang around to listen to his response.
Councillor, given your extended remarks, permit me please to add just a few of my own before we get down to work, and I know Mr. Sullivan may have a few things to say as well. I have to tell you, in my short time as Secretary of State, I've spoken to, I think, nearly 100 counterparts from around the world, and I just made my first trip, as I noted, to Japan and South Korea. I have to tell you, what I'm hearing is very different from what you described.
But Mr. Yang fired back indignantly.
Well, I think we thought too well of the United States. We thought that the U.S. side will follow the necessary diplomatic protocols. So for China, it was necessary that we make our position clear.
我现在讲一句，你们没有资格在中国的面前说。 你们从实力的地位出发，同中国谈话。
So let me say here that in front of the Chinese side, the United States does not have the qualification to say that it wants to speak to China from a position of strength.
The US human rights issues are deeply rooted. It didn't just exist during the past 4 years. The slaughter of African Americans has also been a problem.
对黑人的屠杀早就存在这个问题。
So, now do you see how neo-Marxist movements like BLM and Extinction Rebellion and radical feminism can cause damage to our national security in the West, giving ammunition to despicable governments like the Chinese Communist Party to hit us over the head with moralizing rubbish during challenging negotiations?
Many people within the United States actually have little confidence in the democracy of the United States, and they have various views regarding the government of the United States. We do not believe in invading through the use of force or to topple other regimes through various means or to massacre the people of other countries, because all of those would only cause turmoil and instability in this world. It is important for the United States to change its own image and to stop advancing its own democracy in the rest of the world.
Sounds lovely. Unfortunately, it's all a load of BS. So here's the thing about dealing with China's communist government. Never, ever pay attention to what they say. Watch only what they do, ignore what they say, and act upon their actions. It's important to understand the concept of baizhou in Chinese culture to understand what we're dealing with here. Fox News anchor Tucker Carlson explained it to his viewers this week.
So there you have the Chinese government using Black Lives Matter as a weapon against the United States. You have the Chinese lecturing us about human rights. You never thought you'd see the day that happened. But the amazing thing is, in 2021, it works. That's why they do it. The Chinese know our leaders very well. In fact, they have a name for our self-hating professional class. They call them Baisaw. The rough translation from the Mandarin is white liberal, and it is definitely not a compliment. Here's how Chinese state media describe Baisaw. Quote, they're people who only care about topics such as immigration, minorities, LGBT, and the environment, who have no sense of real problems in the real world, who only advocate for peace and equality to satisfy their own feelings of moral superiority, and who are so obsessed with political correctness that they tolerate backward Islamic values for the sake of multiculturalism. As Chinese state media notes, quote, former U.S. President Obama was considered an advocate of Baisaw ideology. So was German Chancellor Angela Merkel in her decision to welcome more than 1 million third world immigrants to Europe, end quote. Other observations about Baisaw, as reported by Chinese state media, include the fact that they, quote, advocate inclusiveness and anti-discrimination, but cannot tolerate different opinions. Baisaw's political opinions are, quote, so shallow that they tend to maintain social equality by embracing ideologies that run against the basic concept of equality. Amazing. According to one scholar from Peking University, Baisaw are phony and hypocritical and will make the situation in the West go from bad to worse, and so on. Talk about insightful. They know our leaders well.
Basically, baizhou is the Chinese way of saying, we're laughing our heads off at how dumb you Western people are with your woke identity politics garbage, and we're going to take advantage of it and use it against you. Don't expect the woke kids to wake up to it anytime soon, though.